Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they move through their pain, they realize that something worthwhile, something for the greater good could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesandgrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesandgrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Heroes in Grief podcast today, and it's good to have you again with us. It's finally good to have another male person on with me. I have had female after female, but that's the way it goes, and it's all right. So anyways, Jason Tuttle is a former stay-at-home parent and married father of 2 kids with multiple physical and cognitive disabilities. Now, Jason lost his 15-year-old special needs son in January 28th of 22. And from that day, Jason decided that he wanted to help others while he grieved. And that's what this podcast is all about. So he created Letters to Zachary. And he's going to tell us all about Letters to Zachary. And I especially like some of the thrusts that he have toward men's grief and showing, you know, his vulnerability in that and everything. So welcome, Jason. Good to have you with us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Jason and I connected online. I think you connected with me on Facebook, didn't you? Is that where you found me? Or
initially Facebook, but also LinkedIn.
Yep, I see you on there. And you do a great job with that stuff, by the way. I see your stuff all the time. So I don't know. I think you're doing a good job with that.
Well, thank you. That I credit that to my ADD brain that never shuts off.
That's all right. It could be used for good things too, right?
Certainly.
All right. So, Jason, you are in Georgia. You told me that much already. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Okay. As you said in the intro, I'm a married father of 2 kids. I've been married 21 years. For those that are in Georgia, I'm on kind of the southwest side of Atlanta. And Atlanta, for those that don't know, is 19 or 20 counties that are all considered Atlanta. So Atlanta basically takes up North Georgia. Lord, as for me personally, I've done a lot of things. I've worked at the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I did that for a couple of years. In fact, my first day as a ground crew lead was the September 11th.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a wild experience. My degree is actually in physical education, K-12. So I taught physical education on the elementary school level for approximately 9 years before I left out to be a stay-at-home parent of my 2 kids. And ultimately, it was always going to be me to stay at home, but I left earlier than expected just because those last couple of years I was in and out of the hospital so much with my son that I was essentially working for free because I'd burned through all the time possible that I had. And so it was just, I would have rather been at home not making a paycheck versus having to work and essentially not make a paycheck. So I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years up until my son passed away January 28th of 2022. As for the kids, there's a whole laundry list of issues, most of which probably your listeners have heard of outside of his rare condition.
Mm-hmm. Wow. A lot to handle. You are an incredibly peaceful man for having to go through all of that. But I guess you don't really have much of a choice, do you?
No. It's certainly been a learning experience. I will say in the beginning, all of the issues, because at least with my son, we knew at week 20 when we found out the sex of my son. And then right after my son was born, he was whisked off to the local children's hospital. And it was at that point that just a ton of medical bricks, if you will, hit me, because they were telling me about 8 or 9 different things that it could possibly be and just all the issues we may have. And so in the beginning, it was a lot to handle. It was a lot of stress, a lot of, for lack of better words, a lot of anger because, this wasn't the life we were supposed to have, is what it kind of came down to.
No one asks for that or expects that. That's for sure. Now, was Zachary the older child? What's your other child's name?
Zachary was the oldest. He was 15 when he passed away. My daughter is Samantha. She was 2 years behind him, so she was 13 at the time. And she, for them being born 2 years apart, almost to the day, they have identical issues except for my son's rare condition.
Wow.
And genetics to this day can't figure it out. In fact, on top of all of that, we were doing genetic testing when my son was alive, and they seem to believe that my son and my daughter have another rare condition. And in fact, the rare condition that they think that my daughter has, since she's still around, is not only case number 1 to Emory Genetics, it's case number 1 worldwide.
Oh my gosh. So there's nothing for them to go on with this stuff.
No. What we have found out through genetic testing is genetics has kind of an international database where they can put it in there and anybody from around the world can access it. And so for a short while there was genetic teams in the Netherlands and England, I believe, that were doing a test that was similar to it. So, for example, there are people in the special needs community that they have a child that their condition is deletion of gene, and they list out this long number, and that's the condition. Well, the test that they were doing that they thought it was for my son and daughter was, deletion of gene A123. And then they came back, well, no, that's not it. The issue with my son and daughter was it's deletion of gene B123, and they've never seen it before. So we haven't officially been diagnosed with it, but that's where it's heading.
So anticipatory grief really is where you started with all this. And how does that, because that's so unique. What did you find out in that? As now you're a little bit further along, so you've researched some of that stuff, but what do you recognize now maybe from that anticipatory time, in something so rare? What did you face maybe that others may or may not be facing?
Well, at least in the beginning, before I've gotten to this point, it was a lot of unknown. It was a lot of, what am I going to do? My son's got a condition that nobody in a 1,000-mile radius understands exactly what it is outside of medical professionals. And even of those medical professionals, it was only a specific group of them that actually really knew of the condition. So at least on my part, as I'm a researcher, I just start researching it. Like for my son's rare condition, at the time, and this is going to date me, I got on MySpace of all things. And I looked up the name of the condition, and I actually found a couple people that had a kid with it. And then I got online and I researched the medical name of the condition and found it through the National Organization of Rare Disorders. I found a national organization that dealt with the condition that's based out of Wisconsin. And in fact, within that first year to 2 years, I had found the organization, became very familiar with it, got to know the people, and it went to a national convention and became vice president of the organization within 2 years. Wow. So I'm one of those people that when I get determined to do something, I'm 1,000%.
Mm-hmm. Well, it appears definitely so in what I see with your things and everything. And that's difficult. That's because when you hit, sometimes you'd hit brick roads or brick walls, right? Because here you are finding out about that and maybe a glimmer of hope, and then all of a sudden realize that there's not much there in that, right? Was that kind of what you encountered sometimes?
That is correct. And the irony of it all was the biggest roadblocks I ran into were medical professionals. Yeah. Because, I love all the specialists that we've had, especially the ones that I've trusted and that I think have been on the money for just about everything they've told us. But there are also a lot of medical professionals that I've run across that because they've got that piece of paper on the wall, they think they're God's gift of medicine. Right. And I try not to be rude, but I'm also very straightforward. And there were a couple of doctors that I later fired that I was point blank blunt with them. I'm just like, just because you've got a degree on the wall doesn't mean you know everything to medical science.
Especially in these days. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can remember one like neurologist, I point blank looked at her and I said, what am I paying you for? I can get on Google and know what you know right now. Yeah. Yep. And so subsequently later, all of a sudden, I was told that she moved to another practice in Denver in the middle of December. And I went, yeah, she moved to a practice in Denver in the middle of winter and snow season. And so.
Yeah, when I was married, my daughter, my ex's family had long QT syndrome, and it's a heart condition that affects things. And this was early on when that was being recognized, and so we encountered some of the same things. We'd go to doctors, and on the flip side, the ones who were very good with it were in Rochester, New York, and we used to go up there, and they'd sit there and they'd quiz us first because they knew with us and the families, we were finding out more things or things that they didn't know. And so they were kind of getting information from us, and then they'd share with us the information that they had. But I also did encounter the same thing you did, taking my kids into Children's Hospital and knowing that they didn't understand what long QT was. And so, they're trying to give medications or things that were contraindicated and that type of stuff. So, yeah, it's very frustrating, but I would tell anyone in this day and age, you need to be your own advocate in healthcare. And there's no way around that.
Certainly. And especially, at least in the special needs world, the one thing I tell a lot of parents that are brand new to it, I tell them, I said, there's a learning curve to it. I said, are you going to come into this like I am 15, 16 years down the road? Probably not. I've dealt with enough of adversity and doctors and all that to where I've gotten a thick skin and nothing really bothers me anymore. I said, kind of the learning curve is you come into it, you basically believe everything the doctor says word for word because you may not know any better. I said, but eventually you get to the point where you start researching, you talk to fellow people in those areas, you start learning more, and then you start questioning because you go, well, this may be great as a general statement to this disease, but this is not great for the specific needs of my child. And so you need to do a better job catering it a little bit more to my child's needs. And so, that's kind of where I am at this point where, a doctor can tell me something and I'm not going to get offended by it. But if it's not what my child needs, I'm going to be like, sorry, no, we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would hope that doctors would come alongside us on that type of thing too. Like I was talking about the doctors in Rochester, they should with you as well, being so experienced in time in it and everything, to be able to address those specific things, or those, to your daughter and things. So, wow. Yeah, that's a lot on the plate. So, Zachary goes on to the spirit world, and
Yes.
I don't know if you want to talk about that situation particularly, but we can certainly talk about what's occurred since then, whatever you choose to.
Sure. I will talk about anything. So my son was born, outside of his rare condition, he was born with severe neurological delays. So even though he was 15, he functioned about 4 to 6 years old. He was born with epilepsy. He was born nonverbal. He could walk with assistance, but by himself, he could not walk. So essentially, he was wheelchair bound in that sense. But like, I could walk behind him and he could walk, but just not on his own. His rare condition basically caused a lot of his hospital stays as it relates to urological issues and respiratory issues. So that's the main reason why he was in the hospital so much, was because a lot of his respiratory related issues. So about 3 days before he passed, I was a stay-at-home parent. So my typical routine would be, we had a Lyft bus that would come directly to my house. They would drop right at literally my front door. I'd get them both off. I'd get them in the house. I'd carry them out of their wheelchairs. I'd put them on the floor. I'd kind of get them in their, lounge attire. And then if I needed to bathe them, I'd do that. And I'd cook dinner. And then usually at night, I'd put my daughter to bed about 7:30, and I'd keep my son up about an hour later just to give him one-on-one time with my wife and I. And God love my daughter, but my daughter can be a lot to handle at times. And there were days that even though my son couldn't talk, he would just give me this look of, I just need a break. And, I would laugh at that, and I'd go, buddy, it's okay. When I put, Sam to bed, you'll have time with your mother and I. So we'd bring him into our bedroom, and we'd lay on both sides of the bed. He'd be in the middle, and we'd watch TV with him, and we'd goof off with him for about an hour, and we'd put him to bed. Well, that evening, he had eaten well. He ate like a horse. And my wife went to go brush his teeth, and we used an electric toothbrush because he liked it because of his sensory issues. And she went a little too far down, and like he gagged and like threw up a little bit, which kind of surprised us. But I looked at my wife and said, well, you probably hit the gag reflex. Maybe something was still back there, just came up.
Yeah.
Didn't think much about it. Cleaned him up, got him ready for bed, put him to bed. Thought it was a normal evening. Well, that night he was up and down all night, which was unusual for him. At that point, that next morning, I texted his teacher because they're both in a self-contained classroom, and if he had something contagious, I just didn't want to spread it to him, especially other medically fragile children.
Sure.
So I text her and say, hey, Zach's not feeling well. I'm going to keep him home. I don't know what's going on. I'll let you know. Great, wonderful. So I send my daughter to school, keep my son home, and I sit him in his favorite chair, and I go, hey, buddy, you can take a nap. I know you're tired. It's okay. You're not going to miss anything. Well, all day he refused to close his eyes. And I kept saying, buddy, you're not going to miss anything. I'm just sitting on the couch. I'm going to be on my laptop getting work done. It's okay. Still refused. And he didn't really want to drink a whole lot. And that didn't really strike me just because it was the first day. Now, if it had been multiple days, I'd have been, hey, something's going on. Why are you not drinking? So we get through that day. I text his teacher again. At this point, let's see, this is a Thursday. I text her again, say, hey, he's not going to be in tomorrow. I said, something's not right. I think he's got a 24-hour virus. If he doesn't come in tomorrow, it'll give me the weekend to give him recovery. He should be in on Monday. Fine, great. Put him to bed that night. He gets quiet instantly. And so we just think, he's just tired. He didn't sleep well the night before. He didn't sleep all day. He's just exhausted. Get up the next morning, send my daughter to school, go into my son's room about 8:30-ish, and he's awake and he looks at us. But typically when we go in there, he would bounce a lot, like get really excited. He didn't do that. And so I go, hey, buddy, how's it going? And he just kind of looks at me. I wouldn't say a blank stare, but he doesn't really react. And so I walk over to his right side, and I see this dark green streak of liquid that has come out the side of his mouth. And my first instinct is, well, the only thing that's dark green in your body that would come out of you in some form would be bile.
Mm-hmm.
And if bile is coming out of his mouth, this is not good at all.
Right.
Something's wrong. So I get him up and he's really floppy. And that doesn't really strike me because I've had times where he was really sick from a respiratory virus where that happened. So I get him out. I get him on the living room floor. I go through all my medical protocol. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary, except for the fact that his midsection is rock hard, like cinder block wall rock hard. And that catches my attention. And I go, this is not right. And so I look at him for a minute, and in my head, as I'm processing everything, I go, this is not right. I don't know what's going on. And I look at my wife and go, something's not okay. I'm going to take him to the hospital. I said, I don't know what this is. I said, but I don't have the knowledge for what this is. Okay, so I get him ready, get him in his wheelchair, get him in the van, and I get on the interstate and I do like 90 up there because I don't know what's going on. And for those that live in Atlanta, I'm about 65 miles from the local children's hospital, which sounds like a lot, but Atlanta takes up North Georgia. So 65 miles is nothing for where I live. And I mean, I've done it so many times, I can do it blindfolded. So as I'm going up there, he looks like he's falling asleep and waking back up and falling asleep and waking back up. And at the time, this is what I think he's doing. But in hindsight, he was kind of fading in and out of consciousness is what it really was. And so as he's doing this, I'm snapping my fingers at him, go, hey, buddy, stay with me, stay with me. Because like a concussion, you don't want him to fall asleep right afterwards because of the problems it would create. So I don't know what this is, and I don't want him to fall asleep. Yeah. So I get all the way through Atlanta, and I get to the north side, and the state road I have to get on is a state road called Georgia 400. Anybody that's in Atlanta knows exactly where that is. Right before Georgia 400, there's a interstate sign that's one of those electric signs that says "Major accident, all lanes blocked." And I'm just crawling here, and I'm in my head, I'm freaking out. And I finally get up to after about 15 minutes, I finally get up there, and I just floor it. I don't care what the DOT people are doing. I floor it and get around them because the X is literally right there. And so the DOT people would start yelling at me, and I'm just like, well, they don't know what's going on in my van. I get to the hospital. I get him out. He's really floppy at this point, and this catches my attention. So I get up in the ER, I skip the line, and before I can get up to the desk, the security guard comes over to me as if to kind of yell at me to say, hey, you need to get in line. And I literally look at him and go, I don't think he's breathing. I need help now. And so that immediately changes his attitude. He yells for the nurse. She comes over, and we literally at a full run back to the ER and go into a trauma room. I had been in this hospital about 100 times before. So my instinct is I undo his thing from his chair. I get him on the table, and I back out of the way in hopes they'll let me stay in there because he's nonverbal. So I can kind of tell them what's going on. Luckily they do. And there's another trauma room that's they've got double doors too that they've opened up that I can back into while they do their work. Like 30 people out of nowhere come in there, and they immediately start chest compressions. And the first thing that caught my attention was I later found out it was some sort of port, but they take this thing and literally drill it into his knee immediately. No painkillers, nothing. Now, a normal person would come off the table because of just how painful that would be. He didn't even flinch. And so I back up to the side. The head ER doc comes over to me and goes, how long down to the minute has he been this way, to the best of your recollection? I tell her that. She goes right back to what they're doing. She barks orders. She comes back to me and she said, explain to me the scenario as to why you brought him up here. I tell her everything that's going on. She goes, okay. She barks orders again to everybody that's there, and they're still doing chest compressions. They've intubated them. They're putting medications in them. And so they do this for about 10 or 15 minutes. And all of a sudden they bring out the paddles. Now in this moment, I'm compartmentalized on what's going on. This concept of they're going to have to shock them doesn't hit me as to what it really means. And so they put the paddles on them, which nowadays are just stickers that they put on them connected to what looks like an Xbox. and they back off out of the way. They shock him, and literally like a medical drama, he raises off the table. Now I had looked at these respiratory monitors all his life, and I watch it as they do it, and it literally goes boop and goes right back to what it's doing. And at that moment, I go, he's not coming back. And let's see, they've been doing this about 20 minutes. So they worked for a continuous 45 minutes, chest compressions, trying to shock him back to life, doing all these different, like at the end, when everything was said and done, they had shocked him like 5 times and nothing worked. So the head ER doc comes to me and she goes, I can shock him again, but she said, I don't think it's not going to change the result. And I said, well, due to your best medical professional opinion. And so she does, nothing else happens. She pronounces them. So understandably, I walk off into the other room. I have kind of a moment to myself. And then, as I've done throughout his entire life, being a special needs child, I immediately compartmentalize everything. And I call his mother, my wife, and I'll never forget the sound she made when I told her that her son was dead on the table, when she thought I was just taking him up there to be admitted and would be back in about a week.
Yeah.
And then right after that, I had to call my mother, his grandmother, and I'll never forget the sound she made. So they pronounced him. The care team comes in and she goes, I'm sorry for your loss. And I look right at her and I go, this is going to sound cold and callous. And I point at my son and I go, I'll deal with this in a minute, but I need some answers and I need them now. I said, this will help me get through this moment right now. And she goes, okay, what do you need to know? Are you going to do an autopsy? If you are going to do an autopsy, what's the turnaround time? What are you looking for? Who do I need to talk to for doing the autopsy? If you're not going to do an autopsy, what's the protocol for why you would or would not do an autopsy on my son? I said, once all this is done, whether you do an autopsy or not, I said, who do I need to contact? What information do I need? Because I want to get him home to the funeral home that I'm going to do his last rites kind of process. And I list off like 8 more questions, and she kind of takes a step back and goes, well, first thing we're going to do is talk to the coroner. He's going to make a decision to do an autopsy. I said, okay. She goes down, comes back about 5 minutes later, and she goes, coroner's decided he's not going to do an autopsy. And I don't skip a beat. And I go, why? Why is he not going to do an autopsy? I said, I want to know the reason as to why he's not going to do one. And she goes, well, typically in a children's hospital, she said, there's about 4 reasons why they would. One, if your son was completely healthy, he came into this hospital and then died in this room, they would want to know why. Drug related, abuse related, or if it was criminally related. She said, outside of that, she said, because your son has an extensive history and medical issues, the coroner has decided that they're going to relate it something to one of his medical issues. And I said, okay. So, from that point forward, I was just waiting on his mother to come up to see him and that kind of thing. And, we went home and started the whole funeral process and all that. And then it was kind of that evening where everything just kind of hit us like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm. Finally, you let your guard down, right? And let it all out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about the autopsy, because if it's your daughter has the same condition, right?
Uh-huh.
So couldn't you say, there's research going on this. We want to know some of the details of what occurred, or did you think of that to do it?
Well, honestly, in that moment, I didn't think of it. It was never something on top of my mind. And then later on down the road, a couple of days later, I looked at my wife. I said, even if we had done the autopsy and found out what it was, could we have prevented it? Probably not. And I said, honestly, it brings me a little more peace of mind knowing what I know from there versus wondering what it is. And let's say we find out it was something that I could have prevented that I just didn't see. I said, then I would spend the rest of my life beating myself up about the fact that it was something preventable that I never caught.
Yeah, that's a risk. That's a risk of it for sure. And I was just thinking that maybe there was something that would show that, not in that regard toward you, but maybe for the researchers and things that, who knows? But I understand. I
Well,
totally understand where you came from on that.
well, the official cause was sepsis and cardiac arrest due to sepsis. However, I'm one of those people, I pick up on odd things. I remembered the fact he had a rock hard midsection. I remember key phrases that they shouted out while they were working on him. I went back and got the ER notes and read through them to verify that that's exactly what they said. I went back and researched it. And even though it's not the official medical cause, based on everything that I saw, felt, heard, I would be willing to bet my paycheck on it that he contracted gastroenteritis somehow, because all of the symptoms that I felt, saw, and heard were exactly gastroenteritis. And all of the websites I went on, like Mayo Clinic and WebMD and all of them said, if you see the symptoms, which my son had, all of them said, take him to an ER. This is very serious. You want medical attention immediately. And so I 100%, he somehow got an infection from gastroenteritis. It got to his bloodstream, and that was just the ultimate end because we never caught it.
Yeah. Well, you did what you were supposed to do. So you can rest in that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so sorry, Jason. Very, very traumatic to go through. And no matter how you can, all us men, I think, compartmentalize to some degree, but it's still very traumatic and a tough thing to go through. And so I'm very sorry.
Certainly.
So how did your, just a couple questions, how did your daughter react? And I'm sure there was many complexities with that.
Well, my daughter, because of her neurological ability, she always, because every time I took my son to the hospital, I always went with him. I stayed with him the whole time, and then I came home with him. So when I took him to the hospital that morning, she was at school, so she had no idea that this was going on. And so when my wife and I got home about 1:30, 2 o'clock, she wouldn't get home till about 3. So we were home for about an hour. And when she got home, all she knew was, well, Daddy's home, but Zachary's not home. What's going on? And she was just giving us these puzzled looks as to where's Zachary? Where's Zachary? And so, and to the best of my dumbing down ability as I could, I just kept saying to her, I said, well, girl, I'm sorry, but, Zachary's no longer with us. I said, he got really sick. I couldn't save him. The doctors couldn't save him. I said, Zachary's now in heaven, and, I'm sorry, girl. And I don't know if she really got that or not, but there were moments afterwards where she would have just meltdowns that she wouldn't have normally had, that we associate with probably grief, missing her brother. And then for the longest time, and I don't fault her, I felt like she blamed me because I always brought him home and I didn't bring him home this time. And so probably the first 6 months to probably a year, we had moments like that. I mean, she's better now, that may not even been the case, but that's what we kind of related to, where we felt like she was angry at me because I never brought him home. And so to the best of her ability, that's how she kind of processed it.
I think that sounds like a normal grieving process, really. So It makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Okay. So then, how much time went on before you felt like you wanted to get motivated to do something about this or from this?
So I'm a big proponent of counseling. I have always gone to it when I've been through seasons that I've needed it. And once that season kind of went through, whoever I was seeing, I'd say, hey, I think I'm done. I'll keep your name if I should need it, I'll schedule another appointment. Great. Wonderful. So right after my son had passed, right before my son had passed, I'd literally just stopped counseling. And so a couple weeks went by, my son had passed away, and I immediately called her up and said, hey, I need to schedule an emergency session. Do you have somewhere you can fit me in? And so she did. And I saw her for probably 5 or 6 weeks before anything really ever happened in the sense of doing something. And probably about the fifth session that I saw her, she goes, "Have you ever thought about journaling?" And I looked at her and I went, I don't know if writing is really my thing. I don't know if that's what I really want to do, which is, again, ironic that I said that. And so she said, well, keep it on the back burner. Even if you physically write letters out or put them in a Word document, print them out, they're personal to you. And if you don't want anybody to see them, you can put them in a fire and burn them. She said, it's more the act of getting it out is what it is. And I said, okay. And so that idea from the time my son passed to the time I actually started doing it, it sat on my side table probably for 8 months, just because I just wasn't in the brain space for it. And then one night I was on my laptop and I was on Facebook and I was watching some reels and I saw something that was death related, like a death scene in something. And man, it hit me like a Mack truck. And I just started having a really tough moment and remembering just, I probably still have PTSD from actually witnessing my son pass away. And so I was having a really tough moment. I opened up Word and literally in letter form, I wrote the date, Dear Zachary, and I just started writing. And I write it unfiltered. So meaning if I felt like I needed to drop the F-bomb in my letter, that's what I wrote. If I wrote some really dark stuff, that's what I wrote. And so I just wrote this long kind of, 2-page letter out and, I signed it Love Dad at the bottom. And for days afterwards, I was doing that. And I did that for a couple of weeks. In this process, as I'm a researcher, I got on Facebook because Facebook has a group for everything.
Yes.
I found a group ironically, I found a small group that was for parents who had lost a special needs child. Was never expecting to find that specific of a group, but I did. And so I got in the group and got to know the admin really well. In fact, I now admin that group on top of everything else. I got to know the female admin. And one day I just got the courage up and I said, hey, I journal. Do you mind if I post some of my journal entries? She said, no. She said, we rarely get so few men that actually open up to actually do that. We'd love to see it. And so I did, and I had to kind of brace myself. I go, either I'm going to get a really good reaction or I might get a terrible reaction, but I have to be ready for either. And so I did, and unbeknownst to me, I got an immediate reaction it blew up in a good way. And it surprised me at how big of a reaction I got. I've never been one. The hard part about everything I'm doing right now is I have to promote myself, and I've always had a hard time doing that, personally or professionally. And so I had some women that came in there and said, you know what? I have never told anybody my deepest, darkest, innermost feelings on grief, and you just nailed it word for word, exactly how I feel. And I said, well, I appreciate your comments. And I said, I'm glad it resonates with you. And I said, this is inspired by my son. And I said, I appreciate the kind words. And so I posted letters every week for several weeks after this. And every time I got this just huge response. And so by about the fourth or fifth letter in my brain, I went, you know what? Maybe I have something here because I'm constantly getting the same response. And so at that point, I kind of brainstormed ideas, and someone said, well, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And I said, honestly, because this is right before a year, and I go, I don't think I have the brain space for it at this point. Mm-hmm. And then someone said, have you thought about writing a book? And at the time, I was just like, I don't think I have enough. I might have enough to start one, but I don't have enough material to do a book. Now I've got a 2-inch binder full of stuff that I could probably do a book with. And then I said, I don't know if I have enough material. And then we went through several things. And someone finally said, well, have you ever thought about doing a Facebook page? At least at that point, you could kind of copy and paste and put in like a status kind of thing. And you could share it with everybody and you could gain followers. And I said, I could do that. It's not any more than what I'm already doing. So I started doing that. And, like everybody that starts a page, I had 10 or 20 followers. your standard. And just one day out of the blue, I thought, I'm going to start contacting people that I consider like big names in the grief community and see if they'll just give me pointers. I'm not asking for money, promotion, nothing. What have you done that's worked? What have you done that didn't work? And literally everybody that I contacted, I had people with 1.5 million followers that would go, sure, well, what direction are you trying to go? And they would say, well, if you're going to write a book, then you need to probably have a website and do A, B, and C. If you're going to go the podcast route, you need to do D, E, and F. And these are all things you need to consider. And so from that point forward, I just started promoting it to people. And almost immediately after that point, I was getting, 70 and 80 followers a month, which for a 1.5 million account, probably nothing. But for me, it was just blowing my mind. I was just like, apparently I'm writing good enough content where enough people are liking it, and I'm kind of the word of mouth is spreading. So I started doing that, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I'm to the point now that I'm over 1,000 followers in 9 months. I've got representation in 44 of the 50 U.S. states, and I've got representation in 24 countries. And I'm only at 9 months at this point. So
you're birthing it 9 months.
Yeah. Yeah. The irony of that. If you'd have told me 9 months ago that I would have this kind of reach, I'd have looked at you and laughed. I said, you got to be kidding. There's no way. Through other things I've done, like raising money for a special needs lift van for my kids, I've just gotten kind of when I promote, I'm one of those people, I will get on every day for like 3 or 4 hours a day and promote, and I will do it nonstop promotion. And so I've just kind of gotten in that mindset, and that's how I've gotten with this page. Like, for example, you will be the 27th podcast I've done so far relating to grief and things like that. And I say that not necessarily to brag or anything, but every podcast has literally been a different area that can use grief in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm. And so like even for you, it's all kind of about diversifying, trying to get to as many people as possible to try to help or whatever the theme is.
Yeah. It doesn't matter the story, that's what I learned. That's why I started this, because as I was listening to people, it didn't matter if the grief story was the same because they aren't, everything is different, but there's something in there every time that just kind of resonates with you and helps you along the way. And so, I'm sure it happens. That's why I don't mind all these stories being different, whatever they are, whatever they work out to be. That's not in my hands. I'm just getting it out there. So.
Oh, yeah. And so ultimately the page Letters to Zachary started as a men's only page, just because in the beginning, that's what I was looking for. Most groups, especially emotion related groups, it's 95% women, it's 5% men. Mm-hmm. And of that 5% men, maybe 0.5% are what you would consider regular. And so I joke with people, but honestly, I started the page out of spite because I was so frustrated that I couldn't find not exactly what I'm dealing with, but maybe just losing a child, not a medically fragile child. So that's why I created it. And then I got to thinking, I thought, well, if I want to create a big audience, I need to open it up more. To get people in, even if it's women, most women have husbands or brothers or something to that effect that may have had a loss in their family. And it's more using the women as kind of a conduit to get to other men. Yep. And so I opened it to people that have lost a sibling, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, that kind of thing. And then finally it's evolved into, I've opened it up to women, more so the fact of being able to give women tips on how men grieve and to give them some insight so that they can help their significant other in the grieving process. Because I still get women that go, we lost our child X number of months ago, maybe even a year ago or a little more than that. He's still quiet about it. He's not opening up. What do I do? And I go, well, I've got a list of 10 things that I think will help him. I said, well, all of them work. they may or may not. I said, I wrote them as if this would work for me. I think they'll work for you. And then I'll list off, here's the 10 things I think will work. I'll freely give it to them. It's not something, I'm not in it to charge anybody or anything like that. Or trademark anything. It's just here's what I think needs to be done. And so that's kind of where I'm at this point today.
Yeah. I like that part of it. Love that part of it. Actually, regarding the men, that's on my heart as well. Have you heard of Helping Fathers Heal, Helping Parents Heal at all?
I think I have, but it's been a while since I've looked at it.
Yeah. I'm part of that group, the Helping Fathers Heal. We've had a couple guys on the podcast here, but so we can talk about that more later. But I like those who share the same thing, could get the men's thing out there, because it's all right to grieve. It's it's refreshing, to hear men talk like men and share, like you said, the F-bombs or whatever you're feeling that day, and just let it out and talk like men. So, and that's what I like about this. I didn't want to talk too much before we got on this call, because I just wanted to have a discussion with you, because I think it works the best, so, so there's the men's part of it. And then you've got several sites all set up with Letters to Zachary.
Correct.
Are they all just the journaling part, or are there other things going on, or what's happening?
Well, I do have a website. My main page is Facebook. Excuse me. That is where I do everything original. It's got letters on there. It's got in the form of prose. It's got videos I've shared from other content that I feel like are relatable. It's got other people's content where I've kind of quoted it and I give kind of my commentary on it of what I feel like from the male perspective. And it's all like credit's given where credit is due. I'm hyper sensitive about that, just because I've had people where their material's been stolen. So I'm hypersensitive about that. So Facebook is my main page. I then got on TikTok in the video form. And even though you can do 10-minute videos, typically most of my topical videos are 5 minutes or less, just because I feel like most people, the most they'll sit there is probably about 5 minutes. And even then, a lot of my videos are probably 3 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Everything's shorts these days,
Yeah. So, and some of that's the same as Facebook, but because it's video form, it's more grief thoughts I have in the moment. And, I'll say what I'm going to say, and then I'll ask my followers to make comments in the comment section below. And then if it's good comments, I'll then quote their comment and do a video on TikTok quoting them to say, hey, I am a real person. I do see your comment, outside of helping just building a following. So Facebook and Twitter are my two main original content areas. And then Instagram and Twitter, I filter all that through those two other sites to kind of hit that grief community on those two sites. I more or less do that just so instead of creating 4 original pieces of content a day, I'm doing 2, which is much more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that too. It's you spend a lot of time hitting all the different platforms, and just copying or whatever. Good stuff. And like I said, you do a great job with it. You friended me on Facebook, and then I was seeing it come over, and you invited me to the group right away, or the page right away, and everything. And so that's just a way to do it. And you come. Jason, you're obviously just a real person sharing, what you're learning. And so I think that's the most effective way to do it. It's genuine to people.
Certainly.
And they can relate. So that's awesome. Great. So do you have plans for other things now, or just letting things come as they do, or what's happening?
I do. I'm currently in talks with a publishing company. We're in stage 2 of production. I am doing a grief coloring book.
Oh. Nice.
The reason why I'm doing that is, one, it's a little more low cost versus doing a hardback book. And then the concept behind it is, through the website, I've got people that have, it's kind of a community project, meaning people can go to the website, they can go to this survey, and they can fill out this survey, and it'll list, their first name and last initial, kind of where they're from, who they've lost. And then on another a section of it, they can give characteristics of their loved one, things they liked, things about them on there. And then an artist will then come in, take all that information and create a one-page, full page size, like coloring page for their loved one. It's a tangible something you can hold in your hand. And as I've told the people that have actually filled out the survey, I've said it's an active and interactive memorial for your child or loved one that will forever be out there once it's printed, that you can memorialize your child in another little more unique way. On top of that, I did it as well as all of those people in the grief community that have done it. On the back of the page, there's a space where they can, like if they've got a podcast, a foundation, a memorial site, anything they want to promote, they can put that information in there. And then on the back of their page, it will list it. So it will then be free advertisement for the podcast, the foundation, the websites, and so like anybody that fills out this survey, it's free to them. It doesn't cost them a single thing. So not only is it free to them, it doesn't cost them anything. It then gives them free advertisement to something that they can promote that they're in, as well as me promoting it to get out to the masses, is why I did it. And then the last thing, the reason why I did it was, like for me, I've got a younger daughter. So if I'm trying to discuss difficult topics with my younger daughter, we both can have a coloring book. We can have a relaxed session while they do something the child's very familiar with. And then in a simplistic form, while you're coloring, you can go over difficult topics while they're kind of quote unquote distracted by coloring to make it easier on them and the parent going over the difficult topic while they're doing kind of a bonding experience, if you will. So that's kind of the whole reason why I decided on a coloring book.
That is great. That's what a way to effectively reach children. By bringing things up that way. It's almost like when something dies, you try to relate it to a flower or a pet or something like that. And what a unique way to leave a legacy too, the page being all pertinent to the situation and everything. That's tremendous. That is great, Jason. That's awesome.
Then as of tomorrow, I'm actually going to be on a TV show about the page, which I later found out that this TV show that I'm going to be on, I think it's internet based. It might be on one of the networks. I need to contact her again, but I'm going to be on a TV show that she's told me has a reach of 30 million people.
Wow.
And so
you better call in makeup, brother.
Well, like a lot of these podcasts, and that you do the meet and greet session first, and we've done it. She's just like, well, I want to do that, make sure that lighting was well and all that kind of stuff. And so that'll be interesting because, ultimately I'm in education, as I stated, and I'd like to make a career change where I could, financially make some money at this, because I've really gotten into this. And even my wife has come back. She said, well, you've created a brand. I said, I may have, but I'll consider it a brand when I make something financially at it.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I'd like to get into public speaking, but at least for right now, I've kind of hit a brick wall on that, just because you and I know that this topic is not the most lighthearted topic. And it's, even though everybody experiences grief and death at some point, it's not something that people go, hey, let's go to a talk on grief.
Yeah. I've been waiting that out a little bit too. Whatever happens, happens, and that's one of the things. You get comfortable in it. Just say, I'm being led on this path. So, I'm sure you feel the same. Well, certainly. Wonderful. Jason, we've, oh my gosh, we're almost at an hour. That's amazing. You wouldn't even know it. That's what I love about this. Can just get talking and it's like let it roll, right?
Certainly.
Well, keep me abreast of everything, please. I know you will.
Sure.
But I'm very interested in some of that stuff. And And because of the connections we all make, and I make, that I can pass these on to others as well. And some people just come to me asking questions, can you help me? My daughter's niece, is struggling with this or whatever. And then you have a child, something that you can help a child with or something like that. So, I mean, it's great to have the resources. So
Sure.
I also want to thank you for doing it on short notice. I'm still scurrying around and trying to get these podcasts in. So I really appreciate that. And
certainly.
Anything you want to leave with us? Anything that maybe we didn't cover or anything like that?
No. Well, the one thing I will say, especially to men out there, the irony of this whole grief emotional experience is, of the two genders, men are definitely the one gender that never want to be told what to do and how to do it. So there's irony in the fact that the world says that you cannot grieve, or you have to have a short amount of time grieving, or you can't be emotional. I said, so for a gender that doesn't like being told, you're certainly having everybody else tell you what you need to do and how to do it.
Right.
That's the most ironic thing of this whole thing is, why are you letting the world tell you how to do things? I may not be an authority on it, but I'm at least an example to say, hey, I'm a man, I'm opening up. It makes me no less manly and makes me no less macho, no less whatever the stereotype is, to open up about it. And if anything, I'm the example. So, because men typically like examples. A lot of men won't do anything until they see someone and they'll go, well, hey, he's doing it. Well, maybe I can do it. And so, and with everything being said, that's the most simplistic view of all of this. I'm doing it. I'm not getting backlash for it. So why can't you? Is what I tell everybody.
I like it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So that's good. All right, Jason, thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah, we'll get things out there, and I'll have everyone, as we always tell you, all Jason's information will be in the show notes. You'll have links to everything there. So please contact him and tell him, your story and what you like about what he's doing, and maybe connect on there. All right. Sound good? All right, Jason, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.